Well, even more scathing reports of U.S. surveillance are emerging from Germany, courtesy of Edward Snowden. Der Spiegel magazine is reporting that they've seen a top-secret U.S. document that supposedly outlines how the country's intelligence had bugged EU offices and spied on the bloc's internal computer networks. RT's Peter Oliver is in Berlin for us. Peter, thanks for joining us. Break this down for us. What info do we have about this latest bombshell from the NSA whistleblower?
Well, in one relatively short article, there's some very damning evidence being put forward indeed. Now, what's the document that Der Spiegel says that they received through Edward Snowden and were able to see part of says is that the National Security Agency were, well, spying on the EU just about everywhere they could, that they were tapping phones, they were hacking computer networks at the UN, in Washington, D.C., also that they were bugging premises in Brussels and carrying out the same type of phone tapping and computer hacking there as well. Now, Germany came out as one of the countries that was most, spied on as part of this PRISM operation by the NSA. Something that raised a few eyebrows and certainly posed a few questions when Chancellor Angela Merkel met with President Barack Obama a little while ago. Now, what we're also seeing is that it's the same type of thing as that came out regarding the bugging of then President Dmitry Medvedev. So it seems that no matter who you were, wherever you were subject to wiretaps and computer hacking and having your premises bugged by the NSA. And this has all come out as part of these revelations from Edward Snowden, who remains on the run. This document, as I say, came out as one of those that was taken with him when he went into hiding. It was just in the last 24 hours or so, it was starting to read on blogs that opinion might be changing towards Snowden. Had he played his card too hard, had he played his hand, I beg your pardon, too hard, too fast, and did he have anything else to reveal? Well, clearly it says in this article that he does indeed have more to reveal, and more keeps coming out about just what was going on and just how far the wiretapping and the phone hacking went from the US government when they're essentially spying on their allies as well as anybody who they would seem to be any threat. Now, one interesting part of this article says that, it quotes, saying that the EU were a definite target for this type of surveillance, and also says that 5 years ago the EU itself had looked into phone calls that had been made to them, had traced phone calls apparently back to a NSA office that was based inside the NATO compound in Brussels. So they certainly had suspected that they were under surveillance, but it's a very different thing suspecting that somebody's watching you to then finding out through these type of leaked documents that they certainly were watching you and just how closely they were watching you indeed.
And certainly raises questions about how much more we might be able to see from these revelations if more documents are leaked in the future. RT's Peter Oliver keeping us up to date live from Berlin. Now, we have another guest on the line for you, Lode Van Oost. He's the former deputy speaker of the Belgian Parliament. He's on the line live from Brussels for us. Thank you, sir, for joining us. I want to begin by asking what the U.S. has to gain from these spying attempts that have been revealed in the Der Spiegel magazine.
Well, you know that the recent revelations by Snowden, the U.S. government always said that what we do is, in our national security, the war against terrorism. That's not really an argument you can use against the European Union. But in the European Union is, historically speaking, the strongest ally of the United States. My guess so far, my educated guess, is that this has everything to do with economic spying on the EU. You know that the EU is for the moment negotiating a new free trade agreement with the US. Well, you have all the interest to know what your opponent is already discussing internally of strategy. That is one of the possibilities. But this has been going on apparently for more than 5 years. And as I read in Der Spiegel, it traces back to spying from NATO headquarters. Well, this even goes decades further. into the so-called echelon program from the 70s.
Well, it's certainly disturbing revelations indeed, but for example, it begets the question of how much more widespread this is beyond just the United States. For example, The Guardian had published revelations recently that the United Kingdom had in fact planned on spying on delegates to Commonwealth, the Commonwealth delegates basically at a meeting back in 2009. So that sort of indicates that perhaps it's not just the United States that's doing this, that allied nations could be spying against one another. What reaction do you have to that proposition?
Well, actually, you should always assume that superpowers do spy as a matter of current practice. The thing is here is not something that you suspect. Now you have proof, which is something much harder to deny, of course. I mean, spying, even historically speaking, some EU member states spied on each other in the past. But if you look back at why they did it, it was mostly for economic spying, to know what the other country was up to, what deals they were going to get, and so on. And I think if you see the US, for example, is stronger than ever militarily, even technologically. I mean, the internet is an American invention, but on the economic level, it is losing ground everywhere. You see what the BRICS countries are doing. The EU is having stronger ties with Russia, with Africa, with Latin America. And the US doesn't seem to get its economic priorities imposed as it used to. So what I see here is a big risk for economic spying, yes.
And sir, I'm curious, do you think that this revelation will actually damage ties between the United States and the European Union nations?
There's too much at stake for really damaging, but behind closed doors, I think some very tough words will be spoken, yes.
And I'm curious also, the EU had discussed introducing new legislation to try to prevent NSA from eavesdropping on its conversations. Is that something that's a realistic possibility in your view?
Well, of course, you can have legislation. That's a good thing, because then if you find that your allies or your opponents still spy you, you have a legal ground to tell them what they are misdoing. But as far as I can tell from history, I mean, the laws do not prevent superpowers from spying on each other. No, that's up to revelations like this one. I mean, we should not. What is happening now is the biggest revelation, the biggest publication of secrets since the Pentagon Papers at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s.
Well, look, of course, it was understood when it was the Cold War or World War II, but we're in a different era, and it seems that transparency is really the biggest thing that's in order. Unfortunately, we're out of time, sir. That was Lode Venoost, international consultant, and also a former deputy speaker for the Belgian Parliament. Sir, thank you so much for your time.
It was a pleasure.